Good Monday morning, and thanks for listening to my musing this Easter tide. And I've been musing about Easter bunnies. Why do they exist? What does an Easter bunny have to do with anything related to Easter? The same can be true of Easter eggs. I do think there is an historic reason, and I think there is an even more important reason for us to find some value in Easter bunnies and Easter eggs. They were not created by Cadbury just to sell chocolate, I promise. Even the word Easter we get comes historically from a pagan celebration, Easter, which is related to the coming of spring. When early Christian missionaries were seeking to explain the story of Jesus, there were other stories in the wash that people tried to connect to. The challenge was the ways that missionaries would say, our story is like yours, but not quite. The story of Easter, not unlike the story of Persephone and the coming of spring, involves cycles, the cycle of life and death. And here is the real question that I've been musing about, that I hope you will entertain me with and you might muse about too. Spring and winter, Persephone marrying Hades and coming out again, is a cycle, and we can see it in the leaves changing color, falling, becoming compost, and becoming nutrients for what comes up in the next spring. And that cycle doesn't end. It's the circle of life, as Elton John reminds us in The Lion King. But the story of the resurrection might be something different. Is the story of Jesus simply about the ways that life comes from death, or is Jesus somehow an escape from death, that having moved through death, death is conquered so that there is not a second death? People pass through death into life eternal. And so the circle of history, the circle of life, is not so much a circle as it is an ascent, a climb, or a progression. Last week, I think I talked about the ways that this theology should connect to other things that we think about, the ways that we shape our world. And so here's the question. If history is a cycle, then we're doomed to repeat it. We maybe should not be so optimistic about progress. If we think that history is all progress, then probably we leave the problems of the past behind. Things of the plague would be well behind us because we don't have pandemics anymore, but we do. So is it a circle or is it a progression? How do we process it? What does Jesus have to say, and the story of Jesus have to say about that? How does the fertility of the Easter bunny, how does the coming of spring, how does the expectation of what new life looks like play into our minds, our imaginations, and the ways that we move in the world? Well, that's what I've been musing about, and I have a few more thoughts if you can stick around to listen. Once upon a time, I went to a program called the Farminary. It's at Princeton University when an old sod farm was being sold, and the seminary at Princeton Theological Seminary, decided to buy it, thinking that for a lot of reasons, a seminary with a farm was a good idea. The word seminary, in fact, means seedbed. I guess they took that literally. But when I went to the Farminary, I heard a wonderful sermon by the director of the Farminary. He said that ministers learning parts of farming is good for ministry because the skills are the same. That in the compost that smells and decays, the start of new life is already there. And if you were to turn over the dirt of the compost, you would see bugs and worms, bacteria, and all sorts of life teeming through the dead leaves and the dead banana peels. Learning how to stick our hands into that death to bring about new life, well, that was a minister's skill as well as a farmer's. That sounds an awful lot like the cycle of life. That sermon, which I liked an awful lot, sounded like we're caught up in the cycle of life and death, spring and winter, and ministers need to know that story well. On the other hand, I have the sense that the story of Jesus is about moving through death, somehow claiming a different kind of eternity, one that isn't only cyclical. What story do I have to connect to that? Well, there are the stories from the karmic traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, that in those stories, people are caught up in this cycle of karma, so that you live, and if you're not able to become enlightened, if you're not released from the cycle of samsara, life and death, you're reincarnated as something else. Karma collecting on you in a different way, until ultimately, maybe after several lifetimes, you might achieve moksha, release from the cycle of samsara. You would be freed from the cycle of life and death. That's the goal. The goal is not actually reincarnation, but release from reincarnation. And that works on a physical, biological level too. If I think about the animals that I've had that go in the ground when they're dead, you bury them, and then all of a sudden that's where the grass seems a little bit greener. And then birds come and eat those seeds. The cells, on an atomic level, the things that are there become parts of other things. So the death of the dog is buried and it becomes the life of the grass, which is eaten by the goat. And all of a sudden, my dog is somehow transformed into the life of the goat. I don't know which is better or worse. You'll have to tell me. So we have these cycles of life, but we also have stories about release from those cycles. I think it's really important, not that the church has one answer on this, but it's important that we think about how we are caught up in either those cycles or being set free from those cycles. The ways that we gather meaning about our life and death, whether they have purpose beyond our consciousness, beyond our life, are really important. It can be the case that thinking about life cyclically creates cynicism, despair. This is the way things always are. Things are never getting better, or they're only getting ever so slightly better over thousands and thousands of years. Or maybe we think that we make drastic changes, that Jesus embodies a new kind of dispensation, a new kind of life that we're supposed to think about, a new kind of human. And I wonder, when we come to the Easter story, what do we see? How familiar with the stories of spring, life, and death do we need to be? And how much do we push against them? How much do we think that Jesus was doing and saying something else? Because if we get to the Revelation, there is a sort of culmination to history, or maybe the end of history. That the New Jerusalem comes, it descends from the heavens, people gather towards Zion, and perfect justice and perfect peace is achieved. If we seek that perfect justice and perfect peace, I'm curious, do we have to cycle through so many cycles of injustice before we get there? Or is Jesus already at work doing something new? 2,000 years removed from the life of Jesus, I think that is an important and difficult question for us to ponder. Where do you see cycles and where do you see progress? How much hope do you put in human ability to continue slowly progressing towards a better world? How much do you think God needs to intervene in the cycles of sin that humans are caught up in? How much of this is Buddhist or Hindu or karmic? How much of this is clearly spelled out in The Lion King? We have these different stories, and this is the time that we think about them. Eastertide, where whatever happens, however we frame it, the mysteries of Easter, the mysteries of new life, wash over us. And how we think about fertility, the life of the bunnies, and how we lean in to creating new life, seeing hope in that new life. Well, that's important too. And I'm not only saying that because I have a new one on the way myself. I also want to put in a small disclaimer, which I don't normally have to do. I feel like I disparaged Cadbury eggs. If you're not having Cadbury eggs this Easter, well, you're a sinner, a dirty, rotten one. Enjoy some chocolate. Enjoy some fun, because Easter is a good time learning how to find new life and to celebrate it, even in those pagan ways. It's not the worst thing you'll do this year. However we understand new life, there is new life. That's where our hope exists, especially in 2021, where, God willing, we are finding ways into new life from the death that we've experienced during COVID, the isolation we felt during COVID. Hopefully that's opening up. So I hope you find joy in the spring, joy in the weather, and joy in the life of the church. These are the things I've been musing about. I hope you muse about them too. Feel free to send me an email with your thoughts. I'll see you next Monday.